Ric Grenell is joining us. He is our senior advisor for foreign policy and national security. He was the acting director of national intelligence. I mean, Rick, just your overall first reaction to yet another agency within the intel world coming out and saying, you know what, it's likely this had nothing to do with the wet market and everything to do with the lab in China.
Look, they already said this. This is a very confusing mess right now. And I will say this: Jennifer Granholm, the Secretary of Energy, is politicizing intelligence. She needs to get a handle on her intelligence community. She needs to read the April 30th, 2020 intelligence community-wide assessment. It's clear in that assessment from April 30th, 2020, that the media totally ignored, that I negotiated this statement from all intelligence agencies. We had to change verbs, we had to change nouns, we had to change everything in order to get all intelligence agencies to sign off. And the intelligence community concluded that COVID started in Wuhan, either in the lab through a leak, which, by the way, they don't believe was on purpose. This is what the intelligence community said. So a mistake lab leak, or a lab animal somehow getting transmitted to a human. And there were differing opinions about whether or not that lab animal was eaten, whether someone touched it. But it all stemmed to the Wuhan lab, either a lab leak by mistake or a lab animal. This is what the intelligence community said on April 30th, 2020. Read the statement. It's still on the DNI website.
So, Rick, let me follow that up, because they're saying that they classify these things as moderate confidence, low confidence. But the fact is, even under the low confidence, they said that points to that all the evidence is pointing to at this point that this was a lab leak situation. Now, as you said, there's no evidence right now. As far as your understanding is, without divulging anything you can, is there any evidence pointing at one way or another whether that lab leak was intentional or not, or is that still pretty much unknown?
Well, look, I haven't been briefed on a daily basis for a very long time, so I don't want to go out and say where they are. But let me be clear about one thing. The intelligence agencies always have a level of confidence, but they do not sign on to a public statement unless they agree. And so it's very important for people to understand that we negotiated this IC-wide statement.
Right.
We had different, more confident words that were taken out by some agencies because they said we can only sign on to what we believe. This document from April 30th, 2020 that I negotiated is a signed off document by the intelligence community. Why would Avril Haines still have this document on the DNI website? Because it still stands as truth.
You know, Rick, I wanted to ask you this because President Trump said this way back in 2020. This is, in April of 2020. He was clear about it, and yet the media, the press, the talking heads would not accept it. Take a listen by 23.
We're looking at exactly where it came from, who it came from, how it happened, separately and also scientifically. So we're going to be able to find out.
And my question is, have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
So we were being told this in plain sight, and so was the media, Rick, and they still would not buy into that theory. They had to go into the theory that this was an accident,
in
a wet market. This was no way it was man-made or created by, created in a lab.
Now, look, we were fed a line by the media because we were in the midst of an election. Let's be honest about it. They wanted to create fear and chaos because they wanted to defeat Donald Trump, and they saw this as a way to start sending ballots to people, telling them to stay home, and we'll just send you a ballot in the mail. That is literally what their strategy was when they saw this. I'm sorry that we don't have enough media in Washington, D.C. to ask Jennifer Granholm what's changed from April 30th. There is only one thing that could have changed, and that is the intent, because that statement is clear that COVID started in China, it started in Wuhan, and it started by an accident because that is what the intelligence community on April 30th believed, that it was an accident.
Rick, let me take it to the next step, because I look at this thing from a legal perspective on culpability and liability. Here's one thing we do know. An organization I have no confidence in, World Health Organization, said China is not cooperating with access and data, that they're keeping that data away from the World Health Organization, which just tells me that this is, and as we've suggested, that this is China's culpability here is clear one way or another. They are the ones liable for what wreaked havoc on the rest of the planet. And like I said, I lost a brother to this disease.
Let me be very clear. We've always known since the early days of COVID. Remember, I was acting DNI in the early days of COVID when it first came onto our radar. The reality is we always knew that the Communist Party in China was in charge and covering this up. We know this. I can't go into all of the proof and all of the intelligence, but there is not a single person with a top secret security clearance that would ever say that China did not cover this up very aggressively. And many American politicians fell into their trap, and they had to have defensive briefings by the FBI to say, wake up, you're being used by China during this COVID process. This is a reality. Anyone with a top secret security clearance will tell you this. I urge people to go to the DNI website and find the April 30th, 2020. I've tweeted it out, the statement. It's very clear. Jennifer Grenell is manipulating intelligence, and some reporter in Washington needs to ask her, why did the Department of Energy sign off on the statement on April 30th, 2020, and now you're pretending like something's new? We had entire IC-wide agreement about Wuhan.
You know, this to me, I think it's very telling, Rick, because and it does confuse people, because on the one hand, we're told this is what we kind of believe, this is the assessment. Then we're told, like it's breaking news, the same assessment, and it's the reasoning behind it. I think that's what people try to figure out is, what is the purpose of another agency in Washington saying what the FBI said to the public and coming out yet again? Why? And isn't that the role of what your job was for people at DNI is to put all these intelligence agencies together so that when they speak with a voice that is singular, especially on issues that's so huge, not just to the U.S., but the world?
Let me push back a little bit on that, Jordan, because it's incredibly difficult to get an intelligence community-wide assessment. We have too many intelligence agencies that just stick to certain things, for instance, at the State Department or in other places. Those intelligence officials only kind of think of it as their cone. And so when you ask them to comment on the assessment when it comes to something like COVID, many of them will say, well, we don't monitor that. We're not saying no. It's just that's not something that we can sign off on. We had to be very careful on how we got the intelligence community assessment wide. Let me just finish with this. People need to be very sophisticated about the intelligence community. When you see an IC-wide statement, that is all the intelligence agencies agreeing, that is a very big deal. When you see raw intelligence, that's untested. That's something that we don't know is actually true, but somebody might have said something. It can be gossip. It can be a foreigner saying something that's wrong, but we heard them say it. And so this is the problem with leaks, is that anonymous leaks for partisan purposes go to reporters. Reporters report things that are untested, unverified, not IC-wide. To get the intelligence community, IC, to get the entire IC community to agree to something is incredibly difficult.
Rick, we appreciate it. Thanks for being with us as always. And by the way, U.S. State Department cables written in 2018. And internal Chinese documents show that there were persistent concerns about China's biosafety procedures, which have been cited by proponents of the lab leak theory to begin with. And now you got the intelligence agencies saying likely. So this tells you something, folks, much different than what the media was saying, much different than what the people on the left have been saying. The Chinese Communist Party is responsible for this.